Hola, First Gen. I'm so excited to share today's episode with you. But before we get started, I do want to mention that today's guest is a sexologist, and so in our conversations, there are topics related to that. As part of the conversation, we do bring in the topic of SA. So just want to ask that you use your discretion whether this is a topic that's triggering to you. As always, I want you to prioritize your mental health. So I just wanted to give you a heads up before getting started. Other than that, please enjoy today's episode. We do have a part 2 with her, so stay tuned for that as well. Hola, you're listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscilla Luna. I am your host, and today we have a spicy guest, at least based on her social media. So we have Ana. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So, Ana, first in the episode, we like to talk a little bit about your upbringing, your cultura.
Yeah, totally. So I feel like I have a very unique perspective and a very unique upbringing. So my mom is of German descent and my dad is Mexican. And they were separated since before I was born. And so I was raised in two households. And not only was I raised in two households, I was raised across states. So my dad lived in Illinois and my mom lived in California. And so when I was like 1, we moved to California, my mom and I and my grandma. And so I spent the school year in California and I spent the summers or most summers in Illinois with my family. So like basically the rest of my family that wasn't in Mexico or in Germany, I guess, were in Illinois.
Yeah.
So that was like our vacation, right? Because we didn't have a ton of money. And so that was kind of like how we spent our summers. And so not only was I getting like very distinct messages from like two different households, because, you know, each household is a little bit different, but I was also getting very different like cultural messages. My mom is pretty open about sex and sexuality. In retrospect, she knew what she knew, and so she shared what she knew, but I think a lot of what she knew was also like misguided and like wrong, but she thought she was
okay.
trying to teach me about my body and things like that. And then when it came to my dad, that's just like, we didn't talk about it. We don't talk about bodies. We don't, you know, I remember being very like open about like talking about my body and things that were happening. And my dad's house, it was like, no, we don't do this.
Like shutting that down.
Yeah. And then I also noticed as I got older, I noticed that, so my tios from my dad's side of the family, they're more traditional. They're a little bit more conservative. And so my cousins were kind of raised in that household where my dad was like, I would say the least conservative out of all of them, but significantly more conservative than my mom. And so as I was getting older and hanging out with my cousins, and I was like, oh, they have like this entirely different upbringing that I do, or they're like this entirely different idea of like sex and sexuality, and even just like how they associate and relate to like their bodies and things like that.
Yeah.
That is me.
Wow. Okay. So let's see. Your mom lives in California. Do you feel like you grew up around your cultura? Like, were there Latinos, let's say, where you grew up in within that state? Within California?
Yeah, totally. So I lived in Northern California, and so it was the town that I live in. I would say it's like there's a mix of everything. The school that I went to was like a quote unquote like poorer school, and so there were a lot of Mexicans and I hung out with them. And thankfully, my mom was very adamant about making sure, because she didn't know a lot about her German heritage, because my grandpa was kind of like, no, we don't do that. We're American now, you know. So she was raised not really getting that, you know, experience. And so she was, you know, she was raised to be like American, and that's what we are now, and all of that. And so she was very adamant about me, you know, learning Spanish and about me being introduced to like Mexican food and knowing a lot about my culture. And it was very important to her that I was able to speak to like some of my tias, they don't speak English. Or at that time they didn't. I have family in Mexico that she wanted me to go and visit and to be able to talk to. And she's like, it's not fair to them for you just not to adamantly like not learn this language, like you're going to learn. And so it was being like introduced to me, I think not in the same way that like my dad would have introduced it to me, or just me being raised in a Latino household. However, I did get that messaging like when I went to my dad's, and I was obviously like raised in that household as well, but my mom was very adamant about like, no, you're Mexican, like you should be proud to be Mexican, and like really reinforcing those messages.
So your mom is German and your dad is Mexican. Oh, okay. I got it switched up.
She's first generation on the German side, yeah.
On the German side, okay. And then your dad, was he born here, or he was born in Mexico?
He actually still lives in Mexico.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. And then you started to mention about your body.
So yes, I'm a sex coach. I'm also a sexologist. So I do research in the field of sexology. And I'm also a Smut Consultant. So I work with authors that write sex scenes.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah. And so I just wanted to let the audience know that's why you're kind of like bringing that into the story. So let's see. Knowing that you grew up in two different households, how was that experience for you? Did you have siblings that you kind of went back and forth with? Was it just yourself?
Yeah. So short answer, it's complicated, but I will explain in as concise way as possible. So I am the only child of both my mom and my dad. My mom had a son prior to having me. She was married before she met my dad, and so she has 2 children. And so he also has, my mom's family is in Illinois. He doesn't talk to his dad's side of the family. I mean, that's his story to share. But anyway, so he would come and we would come and see my mom's family and all of that. And I say come because I'm in Illinois now. But
I see.
And then my dad actually has 12 children, including me. So he was married twice before he met my mom. And then he had children after me. So there's 12 of us all together. And so there was like a mix of kids in the household. And long story short, my dad's first wife actually raised her 4 children. So her 4 biological children, in addition to 5 of my dad's kids that were not hers. And so I was kind of raised around them. And my mom was very adamant about like, these are your siblings. You need to get to know them. I don't care who the mom is. That's not of importance. She was really adamant about me being around them. And it was also very important to my dad. And so thankfully, my dad's first wife, who I also call mom now, was kind of like the facilitator in that. And so like when I would come visit, because my mom was living in California, she would be like, okay, like I'll take care of you. I'll feed you. I mean, I was still a child, right? But even into like my teens and even adult, I still talked to her. And so she was basically like my Illinois mom. So yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. That many siblings. What was that experience like? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I imagine a range of ages, right?
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like vacation vibes because it was like your summers or like, a lot of the, let's say the first gens on the podcast, it's about their story of like being the eldest, right? Or the responsible one in the home where they have to do like the maybe partnership with parents as opposed to really being a kid. Do you feel like you got that experience being able to go over there, and did it switch when you came back?
Yeah. So I would say like yes and no. So I felt like at my mom's, like I was always super hyper independent at my mom's house. I have no idea why. Like there's no rhyme or reason, but according to my mom, I was always super hyper independent as a child. And I even remember being like 4 years old and being like, just teach me how to do the thing that you were going to do for me because I want to do it for myself. And why, I don't know. But they were just like, well, this is cute. And like, so it kind of just happened that way at my mom's house. And they were just like, all right, like, let's teach you how to do these things. And then when I went to my dad's house, I felt like I was always like treated like the baby. And maybe that was just my perception. But I think it was because they didn't get to see me as often. So it was like, oh, like they were having like their typical, especially as we got older, like they were having like their typical, sibling fights and things like that. But I wasn't really involved in any of that because I wasn't here most of the time. So everyone was like super excited to see me. And so for me, nice. Like I felt like I was more so like the baby, and they were like trying to, like take care of me and make sure that I was okay, because I had to be okay to go back to my mom's, like all of that. And so
Yeah.
for me, I always felt like I was the baby at my dad's house. Even
Mm.
my brothers who are younger than me treated me like the baby, and still do. It's kind of annoying. But
Mm.
so even though I'm
I
not the
see.
baby, I was kind of like, I felt like I was in that position. So whether or not that was the case, that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah. Ooh. And did you get to enjoy that as you would visit?
Yeah, I think looking back, like I really enjoyed it, because I was like, oh, I'm getting like, it felt like I was being catered to, and I don't think that that was necessarily the
Yeah.
case. But I'm like, oh, now we're going places because I'm here, right? Whereas, like, I imagine typically they didn't do that just because, like money wise and things like that. But like, they made sure that it was like an actual vacation and not just me like sitting in a house, with, which is fine. Like, I love visiting family and like conviviendo with people and all of that, but they wanted to
Yeah.
make sure that it felt like an actual vacation, because that's like supposedly how it was framed to me. Um,
Mm. Wow, that's awesome. You're making me think of like when I was younger too, we would go to Texas with where all my cousins and tios and tias lived. And that's kind of what happened. Like once we got there, it was like go time for them too. And so they got to go on like camping trip or whatever the thing was.
yeah,
Um, so definitely I think as a guest it's cool, right? Because you get to be like, okay, vacation
yeah,
mode. All right. So, you know that the podcast is on healing and awakening journeys.
yeah.
And I love to ask, do you resonate most with healing, awakening, or both? And then when do you feel like that journey started for you?
So I think awakening maybe. And I think I didn't notice it until after the fact. So like I was already like,
Mm,
I don't want to say done, because like I'm still living, right? But like I felt like the painful parts happened, and then after, and like I healed and all of that, and then I was like, oh, that that happened.
yeah. Okay. So, when around like what age or what time of your life did it start? Or did it
Yeah,
happen?
yeah. So I think at like the start of my business is when I recognized like, oh, this is actually something that happened to me. And that's actually not even why I started my business in the first place. I was just really interested in like sex, and I wanted to be a sex coach, and I thought it was fun. And as I started helping clients, that's when I had this recognition of like, oh, I've been on this own journey myself and I didn't even realize this.
Mm,
And I would say we'll call it like the pain points, started when I was 16. Um,
16.
so
Okay.
I had sex for the first time when I was 16. And I think that kind of like started this whole awakening journey that we're calling it. Yeah.
Wow. How interesting. Okay, so we'll get back to that in a second. So it's interesting because you essentially created a business around sex, right? And then you're saying like you didn't necessarily notice that all of, let's say from 16 until you started it, that there was a journey already happening.
Yeah, like I knew that things had happened, but I never really recognized it as being this like, hey, you went through this really rough patch and like you figured out how to get out of it and now you're past it. I think it's because I'm a person that doesn't really celebrate herself much. And so I imagine that that was just like, oh, this
Mm,
is a regular Tuesday, right? Like it was just kind
yeah.
of like, I didn't even dawn on me until I started talking to like, hundreds of women about their sex lives and realizing like, oh, I actually did this too, and this is why I'm able to like talk you through it. Like it didn't even dawn on me. I just thought I was really interested in sex.
Wow, got it. Okay. And I love that you're mentioning that because sometimes people don't know if they're on a healing or awakening journey. I had my sister on the podcast a while ago. And so she mentioned that she was like, I feel like when I hear people talk about it, there's like a beginning, middle, and end. So I like that you mentioned like sometimes you don't know that you're on it. Like you're kind of like maybe in survival mode or you're in the go mode, right? And then it's not until you have like breathing room or you're out of that moment that you're able to reflect back.
Yeah, totally. And I think there are also like moments where like you've done some healing and you may not recognize it just yet, and it just happens like because when you're in it, you're in it. You're not, at least I'm not really like paying attention to all that, like as you mentioned, like the survival mode. So yeah, I think there's many
Mm-hmm.
moments of healing that we don't even recognize. We're just like, oh, I feel better now, and like don't even
Yeah.
recognize. that's what it is.
And then
Yeah.
19, you start dating this new person?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think led to being able to orgasm?
Yeah. I think partially because he was super adamant about like, oh, it's gonna be me that like does it, and like I'm gonna be the one to get you to orgasm. And I was just like, okay, like I wanted it to happen, and also I wasn't like, I don't know, it felt like he was like on like this treasure hunt or something. Like he was just like, this is gonna happen, and like I don't know, it was like an ego thing for him, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, okay, well, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not the end of the world. Like, I'm still enjoying sex. And so, like, I'm not, I wasn't too concerned about it. I did think it was kind of weird. And I was just like, well, maybe I can't, or maybe there's something blocking me, like mentally. And I don't really, maybe it's like subconscious or something like that. So I was like curious about it, but I was just like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. So finally it happened. I'm almost positive that it was from oral. And I will say that for many women, it is easier to orgasm from oral than it is from like penetration or manual stimulation or things like that. So especially if you have a clit that is like super sensitive, because the tongue is obviously a lot softer than like your fingers or even a penis, it can be a lot easier for you to orgasm if like you've never done so, or even if you have, it's just a lot easier for many vulva owners to have that experience that way. So he was my first orgasm, I guess I should say. And we were on and off for 8 years. And when we were like off, we would like date other people. I mean, presumably he dated other people. I don't know. I dated other people.
Allegedly.
And so I dated other people, and it was just like, I was just having fun, you know, hanging out with people, whatever. And I did have sex with a few people. And then I ended up breaking up with this person that I was dating. And I met someone else, and we started dating, and we were having sex. And this person was entirely different than the first person. I feel like I should give them pseudonyms, but so
A and B.
yes. So A and B were entirely different from one another in every single aspect. So body type, entirely different, like holistically speaking, body type entirely different, body shape, penis as well, entirely different. The way that they had sex was entirely different. And so like everything, they could not be more different. And I actually orgasmed with person B as well. And I was like, oh, this is like, then my like little antennas started going up. I'm like, there's something here, because I was under the impression that like, oh, I could only orgasm because of person A. I had sex with him, I orgasmed with him, and then when in our like off periods, I was having sex with other people, but I wasn't orgasming with them. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe it's person A. And that's a lot of what we are taught, if we are taught this, that like, I think in, you know, media and things like that, it's like, oh, like the penis is the thing that gives you the pleasure, or it's the toy, right? It's always about like penetration. It's the other person that gives you the pleasure. And so I was like, okay, well, if I want to orgasm, I have to have sex with this person. I was like, oh, he's the reason why. And even though it was like a shitty relationship, I was like, well, if I want to orgasm, then this is my hope, kind of thing. Like, this is where I'm going to get it, right? Because I was like, I'm not getting it from other people. I'm having sex with them. Like, we're doing all the things and nothing's happening. So it must be him, right? Like, process of deduction, right? And then when I met person B and had sex with him, and I was like, oh, this is not, and it was through penetration. It wasn't through oral. So I was like, it's not oral that's doing it. It's not person B. It's not person A. Like, the common denominator here is me. And so then I started like, okay, let's figure this out. Like, how is this happening? And I don't know that I was actually thinking about this in the moment, but in retrospect, this is kind of what I was doing. Was so partner B and I ended up ending things, and I had sex with people after him. and I also orgasm. And I became like really adventurous, not in the sense of like having sex with multiple people, but like trying new things. And I was really curious
Mm.
about all the ways that I could orgasm, because now I know it's not person A, it's not person B, it's not oral, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily penetration. Like, what are all the ways that I can orgasm? And so I was like on this exploratory, like in this experiment kind of like, what are all the ways that I can orgasm, and figuring out different
Oh,
ways. And really what that essentially what I was doing was finding the things that turned me on and doing more of those things, and finding the things that turned me off and getting rid of those things. Like, I was more communicative. This is what I want. I actually don't want this. And the more that I did that, the more I was orgasming. And it was just because I was like recognizing, like, oh, I like these things. I don't like these things. Let's get more of what I like and less of what I don't like.
ooh, okay. So kind of empowering yourself through your sexual encounters.
Definitely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I know the conversation is about it, so it seems like a big theme, but was it actually like in your life?
I was always very interested in sex in general. And when I say that, people are like, oh, you just like to have sex. And like, no, I was interested in sex before I was having sex. Like, I was just like
Hmm.
very drawn to like how bodies can connect with one another, and like all of the different things that people are into. And like, I was just like fascinated by it as a whole. And
Okay.
that's actually why I decided like to get my doctorate in it, because I'm just like so fascinated in like how different people like different things and how they come together and like have this experience with like their bodies. And so I was super
Hmm.
fascinated with it. And I think, when did I start my master's? Um in 2000, I want to say 17 or 18. So I
Okay.
had actually essentially completed this journey before I started the master's program,
Mm.
but I had already had it in my mind, like, this is what I want to do, but didn't make the connection until I was already like a year into my business, and like, oh, it's like come full circle, and I didn't even intend it to be that way. The original idea of mine was that I wanted to do sex therapy. So I wanted to be a therapist that focuses on, sex of some kind. And so I got a dual degree for my master's. So I went and I got my MSW, so my master's of social work, and a master's in human sexualities education, with the idea that I was going to be a therapist who specializes in sex and sexuality. Um, as a social work student, you're required, or anybody that's going for therapy, you are required to do like internships of, therapy of some kind. And I realized that there's a lot of, I think the phrase is like red tape around
Mm.
therapy and what you are actually allowed to do with your clients just for ethical purposes. Well, they say it's ethical purposes, but what I realized is that the way that I like my instinct to interact with my clients, the way that I want to engage with them, it would be considered
Hmm.
unethical by the board's terms, by the social. So there's a board of social work. So it would be considered unethical by their terms, but by my terms, it's not unethical. And that's actually allowing me to connect even more and build even more trust and rapport with my clients. And so I
Mm.
noticed this in my internship, and I was just like, I don't want to start a business work, because I already knew I wanted to work with Latinas. And I was like, I don't want to start a business or start my own practice as a therapist and then have someone coming and telling me what I can and cannot do, that I
Yeah.
disagree that it's ethical. Because it is very like white centered and very, I mean, they're basically trying to save their own asses, which I don't know if I can cuss, sorry. But like,
Yeah, that's fine.
well, like they're trying to save themselves. So I get it. And at the same time, it I believe that it does a disservice to communities of color, because the way that we interact is very different and seem maybe unprofessional or unethical, when in reality that is how we're building rapport with one another. And so I
Mm.
decided not to go and sit for the test to become a licensed therapist, but I got my master's in human sexualities education with the intent of being a therapist. And I'm currently completing my doctoral in human sexualities education, but I'm doing research in the Latina community. So essentially, what I'll be doing is
Wow.
interviewing Latinas and their figuring out what it is that they think of how they relate to sexuality as a Latina, because there is no research that I have found thus far in these past, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years that I've been in school for this, and studying all the research on it. There isn't any research that focuses on what the Latina, like the individual, you and I think. It's about what our parents think. It's about what the public health thinks. It's about what society thinks. It's about the messaging we receive, and teen pregnancy and STIs and all of those things, machismo, marianismo, like all of those things, but no one's asking us what we think. And I think it's less important the outcomes that we have or like what messaging we're receiving, and it's more important what we think. And that's not out there. So that's what I'm doing.
That's so cool. Oh my God. I think the last episode I recorded, or the last one that went live, is with a Latina therapist who was also mentioning that there isn't enough research, or any at all, as like first gen experience. And we were talking about imposter phenomenon. So super freaking cool. Cause then I was gonna like just comment, what a gift that you got to shadow, essentially, or I don't know what you called it. Intern, I think you said.
I called it an internship, and I don't even think that's what it's typically called, but anyways.
Yeah, that you got to witness and see for yourself, like, this isn't actually what I want, or not in this way. And then I was gonna ask you, so then why go for like the PhD? But you answered that question. So super cool. I think maybe like just to wrap up your journey specifically, because I'm just wondering, like, within all of this, you mentioned like you call it an awakening. Do you feel like the awakening was the connection of your whole story, or was it something different? Like maybe realizing it was you, the common denominator. What would you call kind of the awakening piece of your story?
Yeah, it was really that I'm the common denominator. Like, it was always me. I was crediting people. I was crediting the position. I was crediting, you know, what we were doing, like whatever, right? And I was never giving myself credit. And I think that's like a learned thing, right? And especially amongst women, like, and especially amongst like FirstGens as well. Like, I see it all the time in my clients, and it is very much so like, oh, we're not supposed to give ourselves credit, even if we maybe kind of know that it was us, right? And so, yeah, that's what I realized was like, oh, it was me this whole time. Like, I was doing it. Any pleasure that I have ever received, sexual or otherwise, was because I allowed myself to experience that pleasure.
That's big. Ooh, like I'm always talking about healing and awakening and stuff, and it always comes back to us. So it's cool that even like sex and pleasure also has to do with like our own willingness, let's say, to receive, which I know is a really hard thing for FirstGens, you know?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And when you came into that knowing, did it change the way you experienced sex and or men? I'm wondering, like, your partners.
Definitely. Yeah. So, well, I'm partnered now. Actually, what's so funny about this is that, so I've partnered now. I've been with him for, he's going to kill me, 4 years, something like that. Yeah. So we've been together like 4 years, but I had the realization when we were already together. So we had decided we were going to be dating and we were going to be monogamous to one another. We had already had that conversation. And I realized like there were moments where I wasn't having sex, and I was like, my default was to kind of like blame him. Not like I wasn't telling him this is your fault, you know, whatever. But I was like complaining to myself about like, oh, well, he's just like not good at sex. But really what it was is I was so busy focused on him and I wasn't focusing on myself. And since I made this realization that like, oh, the pleasure comes from me, I've never had better sex in my life. I've had more adventurous sex with, you know, other people, and we can have amazing sex doing it. Doesn't matter what we do in the bedroom. It's as long as I'm focusing on me, like the sex is mind blowing every single time.
I'm going to plant the seed of maybe doing a part 2 together, because I'm like, ooh, that sounds so interesting. Because I imagine like maybe some people are exactly doing the craziest things thinking this will bring me the pleasure that I'm seeking. And sometimes it's just an internal switch that can cause what they're seeking, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, really quickly, I will say, oh, now that you're saying it, yes to part two, and also really quickly, what we are often told by like Cosmopolitan or like other media, or even for any problem that we're looking to solve, we're often told to look outside of us. So it only reinforces that idea that like the
Yeah.
solution is outside of us rather than like, no, it's inside of us this whole time. And it's very, I think this is also very common in like consumerism and stuff like that. It's like you need more
Mm-hmm.
things to like solve the solution or solve the problem. But the thing is that if we just utilize what we already have, so for example, bringing it back to sex, like if you already know what you like, you at least know one thing. How can you just get more of that versus thinking about, well, I have to get all of these toys and I have to do all these things, or I have to have more sex, which is super common for people to think. Like, I'm having bad sex, so I need to have more sex. That just means you're going to have more bad sex, right? So,
Yeah.
like, think
Yeah.
about the time, even the little blips of time where you've had like good sex or really great sex, and like, what were you doing? Why was it so enjoyable? And how can you get more of that in your future sessions? Versus thinking about like, I
Mm-hmm.
have to buy these toys and these whips and these chains, which you may not even be into any of that. Do you
Yeah.
even like those things? Like, who knows?
Yeah. Or maybe I imagine like if you're not feeling super secure in your sexuality, let's say like men can offer like, oh, we'll bring in all of these extra things, you
Yeah,
know? And yeah, and you're kind of like, okay, well, let's see if that's the thing. So super cool to
yeah,
like switch that and understand like actually there's a lot of maybe things you can do from where you're at and what you have than needing to like get more from the outside.
yeah, definitely.
Did this awakening lead you to then creating the business that you have? Or no, you mentioned you already had it, right? When you
Yeah,
like stepped into it.
I
Okay.
would say yes and no. Because I had already
Okay.
started the business because I knew this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to help the Latina community like in their sex lives. And but
Mm-hmm.
when I had this realization, I think that's what really like the business was already created. It was already started, but this is what really like I guess launched it, right? Like I launched like right now I have like a Latinas only group program within my business and like that is my main focus. And I mean, I offer other things as well, but it like turned my business into what it is today.
Yeah. Would you say it like deepened the purpose?
Definitely. Yeah. I think when I started, I was
Mm.
just like, oh, like, let me help you with your sex life, anybody and everybody. And I was kind of like, I want to help women. And then it just wasn't, it even had a different name. It's like
Mm.
pathway to pleasure. And I was just like, no, like, y'all are just having really bad sex. Let me help you. And when I had this realization, and I was like, no, and I even came back to my original purpose because I wanted to be a sex therapist in the Latina community. And when I started my business, I guess I forgot about it, or like that wasn't in the forefront of my mind. And so as I came back into myself with this like awakening, I was like, oh yeah, no, actually what I really wanted to do was to help the Latina community. And it's so funny because it actually came to me in a dream, and I'm very like a practical person, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that sounds fake. The name of my business, so the name of my business is Sex in Spanglish, and it came to me in a dream. I will never forget. I was like
Wow.
sleeping and I just like woke up and I was like, oh, my business name is Sex in Spanglish. And that's what it's going to be. And I was like, this is weird. I didn't dream it, but I did. It came to me in a dream and it like woke me up to the point that I got up and I like text my friend, like, this is the name of my business. I like went back to sleep. And like, because it was like the middle of the night. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let me share with you. This podcast was like a download that I had driving. It was just like I was driving and then I'm also very logical, let's say, or I was. Now I feel like I'm letting go of that and
Yeah.
accepting like this intuitive part. But in the
Mhm.
past, I felt very like A plus B equals C, right? And I was just driving and I feel like I was just like transported momentarily, like bloop, into having a podcast for Latinos and then bloop, back in. And I was like, yes, I want that.
It's
So
so
yeah,
out
definitely.
loud.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, oh, people wouldn't believe it, but so cool and so cool that you share that. And then also I wanted to mention, I think maybe what you're talking about has is also maybe an example for people about purpose, because I think that sometimes we think that purpose is forward, like, oh, like we realize the things forward. But in your instance, for example, you were already living, let's say, the steps leading up to your purpose, and you had to go through all of these little things to get to be able to serve the community that you love with the purpose that you like, a deeper purpose that feels good to you. And so it's just like, I think part of a story that sometimes when people are searching for like what is more authentic to me, or I feel stuck in a 9 to 5, and I was there, let's say just a couple years ago, I thought that it meant that I had to start from zero, and that I had to like rewrite my story, but really it was just connecting all the pieces that led me to like this one.
Yeah, totally. And even looking at your experiences like through a different lens, like are you just sitting there in like resentment and regret and like all of these things? Or are you looking at it like, oh, like how did this serve me in some capacity?
Yeah. And how can I use it for what's next? So beautiful. Okay. So your business is called Sex and Spanglish, which I love. When I saw your username, I was like, oh my God, yes, swallow. So tell us a little bit about what you do, what you're currently like. We know you're serving Latinas, but maybe what your focal point is.
Yeah, totally. So my business name is Sex and Spanglish. I also have a podcast by the same name, but it's on hiatus because your girl is busy and stressed. So anyways, there are episodes out there. Feel free to listen. But I am a sex coach. So I currently have 2 programs. I have one-on-one that caters to anybody and everybody. And I love it because it's done via WhatsApp. So I can even connect with people that are like in other countries. So fun.
Yeah.
And it's really just like texting your bestie about your sex problems, and I answer you back as a coach. So that is for anybody and everybody of any, ethnicity, race, gender, all of the things. And then I have my group program that is a Latina only space. And it's called La Sinvergüenza Symposium. And so it's really about reclaiming the word sinvergüenza, and utilizing it as a way to empower us to redefine what sex means for us, or, for the individual, and really redefining a lot of these terms. So we talk a lot about our socialization as a Latina, and because most of my clients are, were raised in the States, but in Latino homes. And so we talk a lot about what I call like dual socialization, which is essentially we're socialized as like American women, and then we're also socialized as Latina women, and we're in the American culture. And so what that looks like and problems that it can arise. So we talk a lot about that, and sex, of course. And really redefining like what that means for them, and really teaching them how to have mind-blowing sex on demand. That is my goal for anyone and everyone, is to have mind-blowing sex on demand.
Yay! So is your one-on-one kind of like, let's say, because I think it's the story you shared with us today is really powerful, of like understanding it's yourself, and that there are things within yourself that can increase your pleasure, let's say, without having to change the external environment. Is that the kind of stuff that you work with people through that one-on-one offering that you have, or is that more of the group coaching?
Yeah, I would say both. I think that that's kind of like my MO, right? Like in general is really about like, okay, I notice that a lot of people that come to coaching are like, tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, what do you think? Because I really believe that each and every one of my clients has the answers in them. My job as a coach is really to bring that out of them. I would say that I do far more teaching in my group coaching container than I do in the one-on-one. But that's only because like they have like modules and things that they can go and like listen to, and I will like bring it up in the group coaching calls. And we do talk a lot about the socialization. With the one-on-one, I kind of let my clients, I bring it up as it comes up in the conversation. So with the one-on-one coaching, it's kind of like an ongoing conversation, kind of like a text thread that you would be having with a friend, right? And so we kind of just continue on, and I teach as I see it coming up. And I do something similar with the group coaching, but they also have like the modules there and workbooks and things that they can kind of do on their own as well.
It's not just changing not just saying that's what you need to do. It's like changing the conditioning, right? And like the inner narratives, let's say, that we hold, and the beliefs.
Yeah, definitely. Because a lot of it is like we're taught, like, oh, we need to, like, right? We need to look outside of us, like how we were talking earlier. And my goal was really to be like, no, you already know, but let's give you the space and opportunity to even think about it and then acknowledge it and be able to say it out loud, like con ganas, and not just be like, oh, maybe if it's
Yeah.
okay, right? Like, no, like we want, let's name it out loud and like, and also have like other Latinas around you, like so you feel like they get it, right? You don't have to explain yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of like the understanding there, and then being able to be in a space where it's like all Latinas, where we supposedly don't talk about sex, talking about sex. So it's really reframing that idea or that narrative that we have around that, like, oh, like we don't talk about that.
Yeah. Ooh, and I love it because I think like even just the underlying two like shifts that need to happen is like learning to take up space, use your voice, right? All of these things that, different modalities, I think that's the purpose of it. And like just through different lenses or maybe the different focal points. And then I wanted to bring up, so I imagine through your work, you had mentioned like essay, right? And like going through
Mm-hmm.
that at a younger age. And I do think I see that can be like, although it wasn't for you, it can be something that like shows up in adulthood, like sex life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a different approach to that?
Definitely. So I start out by asking, like, what is going on for the individual? I think it's super common to have like these blanket, like, there's like this blanket information that's given that's like, oh, it's going to impact you and you have to do this in order to get past it. And like
Mm,
all of that. And I don't think that that's necessary, necessarily. So I really like to ask, like, where is the client with it? Do they feel that they've gotten past it is not what I mean to say, but like that, like, do they feel that they've moved past it? Or are they having like maybe PTSD symptoms or something like that? Do they need to seek out like therapy of some kind to move past that? Not everyone is going to have PTSD from that.
mm-hmm.
So it's really about where are they in their journey with that? Are they comfortable? Are they experiencing pain with that? Are they having like emotional pain? So maybe they might feel uncomfortable with their partner. And so it's really about doing assessment of like where the individual really is.
Mm-hmm.
And getting really honest about that. There are many people that I had a client, I want to say like 2 months ago. I've been working with her for over a year, and she was barely able to be like, oh, actually, this thing happened, and I think it might be having an impact. I think that for anyone listening that has had that experience, usually, yes, I'm going to say 100%, whether or not that is what is actually impacting you. I think a lot of people like to go to therapy or talk to their friends or whoever and be like, I don't know, maybe this is impacting me. Like, better than anybody else because you are living in your body. So if you believe that any part of you believes that that is impacting you, then I would say definitely seek professional help.
I see. Okay. Thank you for kind of explaining that. I think it's just important to define or delineate like what the process difference would be like, and I like you said, it's very personalized, because I also like that it's not like, oh, you went through that, so you have to process it this way, right? Not, and you're saying not necessarily.
Yeah, definitely. And I have some great resources for therapists. So I can send you, it's like a directory. So I can send you that as well. I'm very specific about who people see as a therapist, not that I'm going to be seeing them, but I think it's very important. We aren't taught how to seek out therapy in general, but also how to find an appropriate therapist. So I can send you a directory of both, Latina, therapists, and also therapists that specialize in sex, because you may find yourself with a therapist that knows absolutely nothing about assault other than maybe the one class that
Mm,
they took. And so it's
yeah.
really important to see someone, especially when you're talking about some, traumatic event like that, is that you are getting help from somebody that not only was like, they specialize in that, right? And they're not going to present it in a negative way where they're even creating more trauma for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'm sure the audience too. And where can people like look up your work or yeah, kind of tune in? I know you mentioned your podcast. Are you on Instagram, TikTok, website?
Yeah, so I'm in like all the places. So you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, kind of. Is Twitter still a thing? Whatever the hell they call it. I don't even know what they call it. At Sex and Spanglish, everywhere. So anywhere you look, I play mostly on Instagram and TikTok, and I'm always open to receiving DMs. I feel like people think that like I'm lying when I say this, but I really like I welcome DMs. I try to interact with everybody that actually follows me because I am like a human. I'm not just
Yeah.
like I run my socials, so yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns that y'all might have.
Awesome. Okay, and I'll make sure to link everything in the description as
Yeah.
well. And I also wanted to just say, like, even me, I try to come in confident, but even like saying the word sex or orgasm, like, created something within me. So I'm like, oh my God, like, it's so crazy how, yeah, we maybe like in friend settings, I feel more comfortable with it. It
Mhm.
doesn't feel as intimidating, but it is something like it shed light, let's say, on something within me. I'm like, oh, why do I feel like I said orgasm? Yeah. So I'm sure like the work you're doing is so important because feeling free and feeling like liberated in some way to speak and express yourself about these things
Mhm.
then creates shifts, right? You can't do it in like secret and like when
Yeah,
you don't feel like you can even
definitely.
think or talk about it.
Yeah, that's one of like the main reasons why I created a group program specifically. Like it's not just I'm not the only one that's talking about it. There are other people that are talking about it. There are other people that have similar issues to you that also look like you that get it, right? And so I was like very adamant about creating a group program and like that being the place where we talk and we have these conversations.
So in this part one, I do want to ask you about some resources. So like maybe like a book that you recommend about this topic or different things like that. So yeah, let's start with that. Maybe what is a book that you feel like could be helpful for people, or maybe something you've created that they can refer to?
Yeah, definitely. So two things come to mind. So one is my ebook I have, and it's called 69 Ways to Fuck from Boring to Mind Blowing. And so it really just gets your brain, if you're looking to like quote unquote spice things up or you're looking for ideas. We are creatures of habit. So we get into like we just do the same thing every time and now we're bored. Well, like if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for other ideas that aren't like super out there and that you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on toys and things like that, um, that is available for free download. So I can send you the link so that people can sign up.
Mm-hmm.
And then another book that I love is by Emily Nakowski, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And it is called Come As You Are. And that gives you, so she is a PhD, and I can't remember quite what, but she does a beautiful explanation of like breaking down like sex and sex drives and all of that. And so if you're looking for like I know a lot of people use Google and that's great, but you have to really be able to like figure out is this factual information or not. And so I think that this
Mm-hmm.
is a very good like sex 101 book that everybody should have.
The next question is favorite quote or advice that you refer back to.
Yeah, so this is actually my own quote.
Okay.
I say it in both English and Spanish. So placer es poder and pleasure is power. And it's really, tying back into that story that I told, or my own story, right? Of like if you can really like believe that and like to the core of your being and really understand that, not just be like, yeah, I agree, like really understand that and take that on as like a way of being, like then nothing can stop you.
I want to like maybe talk about the way you play with words is so fun. Like I love how your all of your names and all of the things. I'm like, oh, I love that. And your images, like you do
Yeah.
like fruit and just different things that I
Yeah.
love how you play with that. Is it because of the algorithm or that's just you? Like that's the
Uh,
personality you bring?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. Like I was super into when I first started, I was just like, no, like my logo, for example, if you look at it really closely, it's a rabbit, so like the rabbit vibrator, but it looks like a cactus. And I'm
Mm.
like, I have this image in my head. So my nephew actually made my logo to his dismay. I'm like, can you please make this for me? And he's like, you're disgusting. fine. And like, yeah, it's like kind of the algorithm because I can post things and people can get it without me like being banned or something. But also,
Yeah.
like, that's just like, I love dad jokes and I love like, snarky like things. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I love, because I love the cosas de doble sentido, like I love
Yeah.
comedy movies and things like that. And so when I see your page, that's what it reminds me of, like things of doble sentido.
Yeah.
So cool. Okay, so what I was going to ask though was like if there's a influencer that you follow that like leaves you either like positively inspired or just has really good information.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I always try to think of like Latinas first. Dr. Jane Brittle is I don't want to get her title wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's a psychiatrist, or she could be a psychologist. Psychologist, we'll stay at that. And she actually opened a school to educate therapists on how to become sex therapists. And she's a Latina living in Hawaii, and she has an amazing program. So if anybody is looking to go the professional route, she would
Mm.
be the one to follow. I absolutely adore her.
So before we wrap up, I always like to ask the guests if there's just any message that you have for the first gen listeners.
Definitely. Yeah. I would say to really meditate on that pleasure is power. And really think about like how does that show up for you, and if it's not, like why is that, and getting really honest with yourself. I think a lot of times I see people come to me and they're not even being honest with themselves, and not to say that they're lying to me, but they're kind of like, what do they say, like lying from omission, kind of, or lying by omission kind of thing. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
really important that you get honest with yourself first before you go out and try to find solutions. Because if you're not even clear on what the problem actually is and the details of that, it's the help that you try to get may not necessarily help you.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, first of all, Anna, thank you so much for your time and for the work that you do. I can already tell like how powerful it is and important in our community. So beautiful that you chose to like, get educated on it and then also bring it back to the comunidad and do it your way. So that's so cool. I applaud you for that. Yay.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, please make sure that you share with your amigas, amigos, amigas. And remember, First Gen, that I love you, I love me, and I can't wait for you to love yourself. Bye.
Hey.